The titles Mr., Mrs., Miss, and Ms. can be confusing for non-native English speakers. We only have one title for men, but 3 for women. In this video, you'll learn the meaning of Mr., Mrs., Miss, and Ms., when to use each one, and also exactly how to pronounce each of these words. A large part of American English culture is generally very informal compared to other cultures. We very often use first names with people, at school, at work, in social situations, and many other places. So you'll probably be on a first name basis with most people you deal with in the United States. Now here's a word of caution. The United States is a big country, so you'll find some differences in the habits and expectations in different regions of the country. Everything I tell you in this video will refer to the American culture except for the American South, where standards of politeness are very different. So even though Americans are usually very informal in their speech, there is a time when we address people using their last name. The titles Mr., Mrs., Miss, and Ms. are usually used with last names in English. By last name, I mean your family name or your surname. Now, my last name is Kaup. My first name is Nicole. As a typically casual American, I really don't like it when people address me as Miss Kaup. It just sounds weird to me, like you think I'm old. I really prefer Nicole. Now, we Americans generally default to using a title plus a last name for people who are considerably older. Now, what I mean by this is probably for people who are over 60 years old, so senior citizens. Now, of course, there is an exception to this for children. When you're a child, you usually address people like teachers and adults by their last name using Mr. or Ms. For example, you would call your friend's parents Ms. Jones or Mr. Thompson, and you might refer to your teacher as Mr. Garcia. Now, if you're in a formal business situation where you deal with clients, like you're in the banking or financial industry, or you're in global business, you would most likely address your clients, especially clients that are older than you, formally, using Mr. or Ms. and their last name. Similarly, medical professionals would also address older patients formally too. A doctor would say something like, "How are you feeling today, Mrs. Smith?" And you will usually address your doctor formally as well, using the title doctor and their last name. For example, Dr. Lee, where Lee is the last name of the doctor. But in the case where a doctor, or for children, their teacher has a last name that's difficult to pronounce, they may ask that people call them by their first name with a title. For example, I call my dentist Dr. Julie. Or your child might call his teacher Mr. David if his last name is very difficult. And if you're unsure whether or not it's appropriate to use someone's first name, pay attention to what other people around you are doing and follow their lead. And if you're still unsure, it's best to be cautious and use their last name. For example, if we meet, you and I, and you don't know me well, you might call me Ms. Kaup. But pretty quickly, I'll ask you to call me Nicole, so I will actually tell you how you should call me. So let me explain now when to use each of the titles and how to pronounce them. The easiest one is Mr., which is used for all men, and even boys occasionally. Again, it's usually used with a person's last name. In terms of pronunciation, there are 2 things you want to watch out for with the word Mr. Now, the first one is that short I sound. Now, that is a very relaxed sound. Eh. I. Notice that I don't have a lot of mouth movement with that. Mr. And the second thing you want to watch out for is to make sure that you completely pronounce that ER ending, because this is American English and most Americans will pronounce our ers completely. Mr. Mr. Miller, Mr. Martinez. If you have any problem with the or the short I and you just want a little extra instruction or practice, take a look at my videos on those two subjects. I'll leave the links for those two videos in the written description of this video. Now, it's not so easy addressing women. You'll need to choose which title of the three to use. Now, Mrs. has historically been used to address a married woman who has taken her husband's last name when she got married. And Miss is generally used for an unmarried or a young woman. But really, the world has changed and we don't use those titles a lot anymore. We do a little bit, but not so much. But anyway, I still want you to learn their pronunciation in case you do have a use for them. So Miss, M-I-S-S, is fairly easy to pronounce. Just watch out for that short I again. Make sure that it's short and relaxed so it doesn't sound like an E sound. Listen, Miss. You don't want it to sound like meese. Miss. Okay? Miss. Some examples could be Miss Wong or Miss Hamilton. Now, MRS is pronounced Mrs. That's not too hard. Just make Miss plural. Mrs. Make sure to pronounce the final S as a Z sound though. Listen to this. Mrs. Mrs. That final S has voicing on it here. Z. Mrs. Davies or Mrs. Singh are possible examples. If you need some work on that Z sound, I have a video on that too. You might want to take a look. So what then is Ms., spelled M-S? So back in the 60s or 70s, women started demanding equal treatment to men in the United States. And therefore they resurrected an old title, Ms., to refer to all women, married or single. So that makes it easy now. You don't have to worry about knowing if a woman is married, if she uses her husband's last name. The safest thing to do is just use Ms. for all women when you're in a formal situation. The only problem with this word is its pronunciation is a bit awkward. Ms. It's pronounced with a Z at the end. Ms. Foster, Ms. Ramos. So if you're having trouble with that Z sound, which is difficult for a lot of non-native speakers, please take a look again at my Z pronunciation video. So a quick summary. Use Mr. with a last name for all men. Use Ms. with a last name for all women. And that'll just make it easy for you. You really don't need to think about Mrs. or Miss too much at all. Now, what I've told you is not the case for all parts of the United States. The entire southeastern region of the United States, what Americans call the South, is much more formal and polite in their speech. So make sure to follow the local customs if you're living in that area. In the South, they may use titles with first names, which is not so common in other parts of the country. You may hear things like Miss Susan or Miss Daisy when you're in the South. So again, listen to what the locals do and imitate them. And if you have any question about how to behave when you're in Southern culture, make sure to ask a local to help you out. As always, let's practice these titles in some sentences. Number 1. Mrs. Wilson is waiting for you in room 1. Number 2. I've lived next door to Mr. and Mrs. Roberts for the last 5 years. 3. Unfortunately, Mr. Habib passed away last month. 4. I love working with Ms. Tanaka. 5. Ms. Johnson will lead our new sales team. I hope you found this lesson useful. If it was, stick around and watch some others. Here are a couple of videos I think you might like. And please do me a favor and like and share this video. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.